podcast. This is ABC DVD, an alphabetic journey through our ridiculously scary film collection. I'm Noah.
And I'm Josh.
And this is episode 3, Cabin in the Woods. So, if you haven't listened to any other podcast, there is going to be spoilers. This is a movie you do not want spoiled.
Yes, normally we say, okay, watch the movie, and then we'll talk about it. But this time, we really want to stress, the more blind you go into watching the movie, the more you'll enjoy it. Mm-hmm. So please go watch it, and then listen to us.
So, you've been warned. Mm-hmm. So, Cabin in the Woods, it was filmed in 2009, but did not come out until 2011. It had been shelved for a bit of time.
Yes, I have no confirmation on this, but I bet they pulled it off the shelf once Chris Hemsworth became Thor. Yeah, so.
There are a lot of big names in this, but first, it was directed by Drew Goddard, whose accolades are Bad Times at the El Royale and a few episodes of The Good Place. It was written by Drew and Joss Whedon, who is well known for Buffy, Angel, Firefly, and the first 2 Avengers movies.
Yep.
The stars is Kristen Connolly, whose biggest things are The Bay and House of Cards. Chris Hemsworth, who was not big at the time. He was in this and Star Trek.
Yeah, Star Trek 11, the first JJ verse. He was probably filming them at the exact same time, and that was just a little cameo.
Yeah, and
so most of the core group are unknowns.
Right, and if you're wondering, where was Chris Hemsworth in Star Trek? He's Captain Kirk's dad.
Yeah,
so
he's Daddy Kirk.
Daddy Kirk. And the other 2 are Bradley Whitford from West Wing and Get Out, and Richard Jenkins, who has a very long list of things, but you would have seen him in The Shape of Water or 6 Feet Under. It made $66.5 million when it came out, and the official summary is, 5 friends go for a break at a remote cabin where they get more than they bargained for, discovering the truth behind the cabin in the woods.
I mean, that is technically true. We said before, the less you know, the better, so I could see a lot of summaries trying to hide what is the twist of this film.
This is a hard film to tell people what it is, because there is so many twists in this that you don't want to let somebody... You want to say, like, well, it is a horror, but it's also a comedy, and it's also a deconstruction, and it's also weird.
Yeah. It's one of those few horror films where I think if you're a fan of horror movies, you'll love this, and if you're annoyed at the cliches of horror movies, you'll love this.
And if you've ever seen any kind of horror film, this probably touches on it at some point.
The opening sequence is perfect to set the audience to what they should be expecting or not expecting, because you get this dramatic horror, scary images of sacrifices and blood, and then it goes to an office scene of 2 people just talking about, hey, my wife's baby-proofing the house and I'm having a hard time, and the director kind of said, I wanted people to question, like, did I walk into the wrong movie?
You do feel that way, and I think, obviously having Bradley Whitford there adds this kind of like, wait, I don't know what's going on here, and I think it's done great, especially the first jump scare is they're just bantering, like, are you even listening to me? And then boom, there's a jump scare.
And a scream, and Cabin in the Woods pops up, and it's like, oh yes, I'm in the right movie, but everything I thought I was going to see, like some cheesy Evil Dead rip-off, is not true. There's something more going on here.
Well, and I think the hook comes out right away, and you're like, okay, I'm immediately invested in this movie because that was a weird scene. To then jump into the let's introduce the main characters in a typical horror element, is they do jump right into the, well, here is your main actress. Here's her backstory. She's off of a bad relationship with a professor. Which is creepy.
It's creepy, and I'm not 100%, but I feel like the drawing of the professor is supposed to be Stephen King.
It looks like Stephen King. I had that marathon.
I can't find any proof of that, but it's like that might be another horror reference. But I love this, you have what I would call the above and below storylines, and just as you get invested in one, it shifts you to the other, and you go, no, I want to know more about that, but then suddenly you're like, well, no, I like this storyline too, and I'll mention that many times of when I love that they just shift, and the introduction of both the below of the office and the I guess the organization, and then what would be the typical horror film,
right,
is just great. And I love at the beginning when we meet the five, they're not teens, they're college students, the five youths.
Yes.
They're presented as actually smart and rational at the beginning.
And I wrote that down. I was like, they do it in a very good way. Like, here's these books, and Chris Hemsworth's like, oh no, don't read this book. Read this other book about obscure Russian history, and here's how you can get past this classes. They don't set them up as like the stereotypical. Oh, it's the jock, and it's the nerd, and it's what they will become. But it sets up like, wait a second, we know these characters aren't stupid, and that will pay off later when things start to go awry.
And the only one who kind of fits the stereotype is the stoner guy, and it is a great introduction with what I would call the coolest bong I've ever seen, with it being a hidden travel mug bong,
right, which cost $5,000 to prototype and make, and it's like. It's like, I'm not a smoker. I was like, well, that looks cool, just to be a fact that you can like slap it down, hook it up, and now it's a mug.
And now it's a mug that actually functions, and you can drink your drink and hide it from the authorities. And this was before a lot of states had legalized it recreationally, so it was like, oh, I want that. And it's another, and then. To keep an eye on that character, he's the go-to actual oracle of this film, and he says basically the end of the movie right there at the beginning of society needs to crumble, you'll see things my way.
Yep. It does that thing where, and I'm going to say this probably several times, this is a movie that benefits from multiple watches where you get like, they telegraph that at the beginning, but and a lot of horror movies do that, where they kind of they do a wink and a nod, but this one has so many Easter eggs and references that one viewing you will not catch. Even a percentage.
There's movies that benefit from multiple watchings, and there's some that are detriment. Like The Sixth Sense, you get one or two watchings, and after that, it's too dependent on the twist that I don't really ever want to rewatch it. But this, and let's say a lot of Edgar Wright movies, you get like, oh, they told us everything in the movie, but I didn't know it at the time.
Right.
And it's so much more rich now that I do.
So we've set up the characters, we've set up the story that they're going to go to the cabin for the weekend. A la a lot of horror movies, and they're off on their way. And then we go back into the control room, and they're talking about things in a very ambiguous way, which makes sense to them, but doesn't make sense to us. They're talking about Japan still in the reigning, but Sweden's falling off. And looking up a lot of these other countries that are doing these things is interesting. Like, later on we look at it, like Sweden is a reference to The Thing. In the snow cover thing, they fell apart. Japan is The Ring.
The Ring, and all those the evil spirit movies.
Spain is a reference to Dracula, and Buenos Aires is a reference to King Kong. So there's a lot of large umbrella horror tropes going out throughout this movie. And I think there is very few movies that aren't affected by how they're trying to archetype, the horror genre, from slashers to horrors to psychologicals. And we're going to be kind of talking about, like, did you see this Easter egg? Did you see this Easter egg? But the first one is, they're going to a remote location, and then they get to the warning, the harbinger Mordecai, who I think you can probably think of a dozen movies where you get that initial warning, like, hey, this is your first warning to turn around. And I think it's done in the Texas Chainsaw Murderer kind of style of, hey, don't go up there. Nothing good happens up there.
A lot of history up that.
A lot of history up that
road. Everything is there to remind you of the cliches and to play off of it, because then later on, when that same harbinger has a phone call, it is done up for an amazing laugh of he's over the top, and then he breaks character. It's like, oh, I'm on speakerphone, aren't I?
Which I think is done really well. There's these moments where, like, oh, we're used to this kind of stereotype, and then it kind of turns on its head. Like, wait, no, I don't think this is the right way.
Yeah. After they leave the Harbinger, they show the establishing shot of them going into what I would call the arena. And this is a question I've had upon many watchings, is they show a hawk flying with them, and then the hawk hits what is, in essence, a force field of hexagons. And I'm wondering, is this a good thing or a bad thing for what will be a surprise death later on? Would that surprise be even more impactful?
I think you need it. I mean, because this movie definitely plays on a lot of WTF moments. You know, the first shot, like, what movie I'm in. And then there's this, I think it adds a Chekhov's gun.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I think by the time you get to that surprise, which we'll talk to, is like, I think you've forgotten about that force field. But I think you need to establish it, because if it happens in the movie, you're like, wait, when was there a force field?
And I on my first watching, that's how I felt, is like, I was like, wait, what is this force field? Okay, they're being encased in a cage, and I did forget about it until that moment. And I think, it would have been a tell in the control room of make sure that the force field's up versus like having this moment.
Just this one little moment, which I think keeps the audience still engaged. Like, wait, that was really weird. What was that? But then the movie keeps going on, and you get to the cabin, which is the beginning of many Evil Dead references.
Oh yeah, this is. I mean, Evil Dead is the granddaddy of all the horror films that they are referencing, because Evil Dead takes place in a cabin in the woods.
And I feel like not the exact cabin, but they are trying to make it as close to the cabin.
And they shot it the exact same way, of a Sam Raimi low angle, looking at the leaves, looking at the cabin, and they have like the same porch swing kind of hitting the wall. And it made me make the same joke I did when I was watching Evil Dead of, looks like a tiny cabin, but this tiny cabin has a lot of rooms in it.
It just keeps going back.
Yeah.
It's in essence just a box.
Yes.
But I mean, I think I want to talk about a lot of the Evil Dead references now, so we don't just keep going, well, that's an Evil Dead.
Yeah, that's an Evil Dead.
I think the best one, which is what you told me when we watched the first time in theaters, is the wolf and the guy saying, well, go kiss that moose, and everyone's like, that's not a moose. And it's like, that's a really weird line if you don't know the deep cut.
Yeah, because in Evil Dead 1 and mainly in Evil Dead 2, the animal on the wall is either an elk or a moose that laughs and causes issues. And it's just these great, not necessary to the plot of the story, but if you, like I said, if you're a fan of horror films, you're going to get the references.
Well, as I say, the other references being like the trapdoor to the basement is very Evil Dead. And also one of the monsters that's in the betting board is called Angry Molesting Tree.
Yes.
And that has a deep history with Sam Raimi. And for better or worse, it's not his best moment in cinema history.
But it happened. And, the creatures that they have to fight in this movie are very similar to the Deadites. They're zombies, but they're slightly different zombies. They're
right. Evil Dead definitely is on the minds of everyone.
Yeah, I like how you learn more of how the organization controls the group. The first one that we're told directly is that the dumb blonde was made a dumb blonde through making her dye her hair blonde.
Right, and having chemicals in it.
Yeah. And it showed, as we said earlier, that they were all smart, and that this character is in a committed relationship and is intelligent, and as they get further on is becoming more bimbo-ish and more promiscuous. And
right, which
is the cliche.
Yeah. But the key element of when they're kind of doing the backstories is, free will has to exist. This game that we don't know all the rules to yet is like, these characters have to make the decision. And I think the greatest part of coming up is when they make that decision of what is going to be their doom.
Yeah. We still get some more establishments of characters. I love the painting showing that these are decent people.
Yep.
They're also like kind of the audience in most horror films of, nah, I'm not having this, I'm not staying in this house, or like, this painting's not worth it. And it's showing that, the scholar, as they're called in this one, is a good person, and that they're rational and not following into their tropes quite yet. So when they do, it's more apparent.
Right.
And also the little flirting scene between the two characters, I felt, because I'm bad at flirting too.
No, and I think it definitely does establish the pre-characters to then the stereotypical characters that are going to happen in the next few moments.
Yeah. Just a quick fun thing: the lake scene when they're all swimming. A great tension building moment that breaks with comedy. But the stoner character, he had to wear more clothing because in reality he was more buff than Chris Hemsworth or anyone else on the crew. And it's like, no, that kind of ruins your character if you're seen as the strongest one.
Right, because he does have kind of like a Shaggy from Scooby-Doo thing going on. He's like, you don't want him to be like, whoa, Shaggy's ripped. But I think the best part coming up in my mind is the betting pool. It really breaks the tension. It makes it fun because you now realize, like, oh, there are things going on. And it goes back to that free will, but they also know that, like, these guys are going to pick something, and that's going to set the mood of this, program. And so they're all ready and willing to take kind of that human aspect of like, well, we're gonna put some money on it.
Yeah, it's like any job is a job, but you can make it fun if you have the right people. And then this gruesome gallows humor of, we don't know what kind of horror movie we're in yet, so let's bet which one we're in. And this betting board has become a meme for, unfortunately, the past 3 years of terrible things like who had this, who had that,
who had murder hornets.
Yeah, it's like when you saw it in the theaters, like you wanted to pause because you're like, I only caught what was that? Is that sexy? What else is that?
And I do encourage people to go pause it and read it all because it does cover so many movies. My personal favorites, because they are deep cuts, is one of them, and no one bet on him, was Kevin. It just says Kevin. And that is a nod to Elijah Wood's character in Sin City. Okay. With the shiny glass.
The one who ate people,
Yeah. It's like, yes, that's how far the horror movie is. Like, no, Kevin is a character.
Yeah.
I'm also really interested in, like, what are the sugar plum fairies? I could not find a horror movie with sugar plum fairies.
And is that who we see later on with the teeth?
It's possible. Yeah. I mean, that thing is like, a lot of these characters will come back, and they are references to movies in the past. And I think what they do is a good job is you can associate these with movies that come out after this because, for better or worse, this trope still exists.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very fun scene. It sets it up for the later when you actually get to see most of these characters, if not all of them.
Well, and that's why I love rewatching this movie, because not only are the Easter eggs there, but I, on this most recent rewatch, was putting on my film nerd, film scholar hat, and during the party scene of them drinking, I noticed that they had glass bottom mugs. And I went, well, why would they choose that when regular red Solo cups are traditional and things like that? And then my history nerd piped up in my brain and said, just like, well, glass bottom mugs were invented so that people weren't accidentally taking the king's shillings that were hid in their beer, and then they were forced to be into service of something they didn't want to be in service to, which is what these characters was happening. They're being forced into this, in essence, ritual that we don't know yet, and it's just like every little detail was brought up with care and consideration.
And that's your English history for this moment. But they do go into the basement. They do choose the cursed book of there are zombies.
Yes.
Hillbilly zombies.
And again, the cellar is another film horror nerd's gold mine. You get a puzzle box, you get a film reel, you get all these things. Dress. But yes, we get the book.
I personally enjoy the nod to Hellraiser with the puzzle box.
It's a puzzle sphere instead of a box.
Yes. But she does a Latin phrase, which she says makes no sense, which it actually makes a lot of sense. The Latin phrase is, pain outlives the flesh, pain raises the flesh, pain ignites the spirit, which
Yeah.
You're raising zombies. This is what happens.
And this is, again, back to their granddaddy. The Evil Dead first one, they find a book and they read the Latin. And the Latin in that is actually kind of nonsense. In that one, it just says, hey, the two guys you passed on the road were the director and the producer.
Give them a nod as you drive by.
Yeah.
But I think you need things like this in these horror movies because the audience expects it. You expect a magical saying. And then it's like, well, yeah, of course she said the thing. Now there's zombies. We're not going to question that.
Yeah, you need some kind of fantasy to make me believe, oh, these things can be real because they did something that normally doesn't happen.
Right. It's that free will. They read the book. They said the Latin, which the stoner once again is like, hey, let's not do this. And he's already showing signs of not being part of the program. He's hearing the voices. He's seeing the writing on the wall that we're all kind of, he is that audience avatar saying, don't do that. That's a really bad idea. Don't do that.
Yeah. And this is a subtle reason. They do explain the reason why the stoner sees through the seams. And it was a deleted scene, but they still reference it. But it's during a harsh fast time is that the stoner has a secret stash of weed that no one knew about that has been kind of keeping him immune to the chemicals that the underground is doing to make everyone either dumb or compliant,
right,
or horny,
right. Which then goes into we are now in the full horror movie. It's like they're not acting themselves. That you're getting this. You're like, oh, let's go out into the woods and have sex, which is so 80s. It's like you have to see the boobs because all these 80s movies, you just got a flash. It was like it's your gratuitous moment, and it's like it is a moment, but it's like a lot of people were like, well, why would these people do that? And it's like I love the moment. It's like, well, just release these pheromones, like, and it's like there's mist because there's always mist in an 80s movie. It's like, well, of course, if you go back and watch the movies, they're clearly being drugged with pheromone mist.
This brought up a memory of me. I think it was Freddy versus Jason, where they had this moment within the first 30 seconds of the film, and it made me laugh because usually you have to earn it.
Yes.
And in this movie, they go down when she's, when they're starting to have their naughty time, and she's finally shown her breasts.
Right.
It goes below where there were all these guys watching, and I think that's kind of a reflection of the audience of all these. It's like you are as creepy as these people watching young kids have sex and get murdered, and you find some enjoyment of this. Like, come on, get out of here. We have work to do.
Exactly. But and then I think you get to kind of like another like W2F moment of the blood right is they get murdered in the traditional slasher film way. Yeah. And then you get this, they say a chant, they break a vial, there's blood, and you're kind of given another MacGuffin of what is going on here?
Yeah, you see that somber, and it's like they're praying. And it's like, oh, this is not just a experiment. This has a reason.
And then you're going further into the horror tropes of, oh, we've got to stay together. No. Change that. No, let's all split up.
Yeah, and there's a great moment of the stoner about to be attacked by the little girl, and I laughed out loud every time, especially in the theater, when Chris Hemsworth comes in and just clotheslines her. It is phenomenal of breaking her expectations while enforcing them.
No, and I think there's a lot of funny moments in here because you're expecting, oh, well, he's just going to get attacked. It's like, no, they're going to clothesline him because Chris Hemsworth is buff. He can take out a zombie 8-year-old.
With one arm.
One arm.
Yeah. And then later on, again, with the trope of the stoner gets dragged into the, I guess I could say woods. Into the woods, into a grave. It's Marty. I could say his name. And I love that, he's dead, but it's also the stereotype of horror movies and also, let's say, superhero movies. They're not dead unless you see a body.
Yeah, if you don't see a body, it doesn't count. Yeah. But I think, and another one is when they're in the black room, it's like she drops the weapon because you're always like, why did you drop the weapon? Yeah. It's like, it is just a subtle nod. They don't even make a meal out of it. They just zap her hand, she drops it, and it makes you want to go back and watch older movies and be like, hey, if I were to imagine that this syndicate exists, would a lot of these movies kind of like play into that?
And that's why I'm saying if you hate the stereotypes of horror movies, this movie is for you because it explains those away.
Right. And so we get to what would be the end, and they have this this line, the virgin's death is optional. And that opens up to a lot of slasher films where it's like, well, sometimes someone dies and sometimes they don't. As long as she suffers and knows that, like, you know, she has to fight for her life. And you get this moment of where Bradley Whitford has this somber moment, and then he's like, tequila is my lady, and they're having a party while this girl is being destroyed on screen,
beaten to death. And then I said, this is the turn in the movie. You are no longer in the classical horror film. We are done with that. Well, we are now in the survival horror film.
Exactly. And the nod to Jason movies where, you know, she's saved, he goes into the lake, he pops back up. But then there's a phone call and there is a big turn. I think it's one of those parts of the movies where it's like, this is where you should have watched the movie. It is the biggest turn on its head where this movie goes like, this movie is now 100% different and you have no idea where we're going now.
And it's very rare that you get like a horror film where you're kind of rooting for both sides. Because I went through my memory of the only time I can think of a horror film is Psycho, where he crashes, he's killed her, the what we thought was our main actress, and has thrown the car into the lake, and then it stops sinking. You're going, no, the car has to sink, otherwise he's going to get caught. And in this one, you're going, oh God, the blood sacrifice to appease the old gods is not working. What are they going to do? And you're also going, well, I want them to survive because I really like these two characters.
Well, and I remember in the theaters, you know, seeing this is like they're in this elevator. You're like, what is going on? I mean, I am like on the edge of my seat, like, well, you have my attention now, and you get what I would say is like the old school haunted house, where it's like you'd go to little vignettes like, oh, what's in this room? Oh, it's a ghost. Oh, what's in this room? Oh, it's a creepy clown. You know, it's like, and I think it sets up like that feeling of like, I want to know what is down this hallway.
And the elevator is a gold mine of horror movie references that everyone can just enjoy looking. But I love having that Hellraiser guy with the puzzle box, because not only does he have amazing expressive eyes,
I mean, his eyes are dreamy.
You just couldn't. I want to see a movie with this guy.
Yes,
but that show don't tell kind of thing of, you get that realization as the character does at the same time of, oh crap, anything in that room is what was on the board. I now know how they chose the horror film. This really drives it home of, by reading the book, they got the zombies, but they almost got a mermaid. They almost got a Hellraiser. They almost got...
Well, they got a poltergeist, a werewolf, a clown. The one I really liked was the twins from Shining are in there.
Yeah. And if you had caught some things on the betting board, like, how is a unicorn scary? How is, sugar plum fairies scary? It's like, they're going to show you.
Yeah, it's like not everything that we think is nice and good is actually nice and good. It's like, I think the unicorn is like, no. There are stories where it's like, these are ancient stories of unicorns are not always good things to come across. Leprechauns are not always good things to come across. We've, cartoonified them in the modern age, but there are stories where like, no. Do not mess with these things from the ancient world.
Yeah. And then another Evil Dead reference of good zombie hand saving them is great.
See, I took a different stance on that. I thought that was an Addams Family reference. I thought it was Thing from Addams Family.
It could be a combination of both, of the zombie hand of Evil Dead 2 where he cuts it off, or Thing being a helpful hand. They eventually now turn the tables on the organization by purging all these elevator rooms into the organization. And I just want to ask, why do you even have that button? It's a giant, on this control panel of switches you don't know, you have this giant red button that says purge.
Yes.
It's like, why do you even have that?
And why is it so close to the coffee button? No, and I think that is a fun scene because this is where they make a meal out of their universes. Like, we're going to show you every horror film that we have ever loved doing the thing that they do. You have It. You have a giant snake. You have a robot apocalypse. You have zombies. You have everything under the sun. And I think what I appreciate is that you have the masked home invasion thing, which I think is a nod to Scream.
Yeah.
But it definitely still works in the modern age to, like, The Purge.
Which came out afterwards.
Which came out way afterwards, but it still works. And, I mean, things like when Scarecrow people attack the Freeman guard is like, that's to me like, well, that's Jeepers Creepers.
Yeah.
Or it could be to someone else like, well, no, that's actually this. But they've made it ambiguous enough that it fits within all horror genres.
Yep. And you finally get to see the
mermaid.
The mermaid. It's the merman. And it's like, oh, how can that be scary? It's like, yeah, that kind of looks terrifying. You can see that would have been like a Jaws or a Lake Placid kind of movie.
And I think it's all culminating to the final scene, which they kind of tip their hand a little bit with, the director doing her voice over the speakers. But you get Sigourney Weaver, the Scream Queen, coming out and kind of talking to them.
So this was a thing I had when watching it, because I love Sigourney Weaver and I think she's fantastic in this. But she was never really a Scream Queen. She was like the badass woman. She was in Aliens. She was in Ghostbusters. And I'm wondering, would this have been better with Jamie Lee Curtis?
I could see, I think feels like she gets the title of Scream Queen with Jamie Lee Curtis, with all these kind of 80s thing. I mean, your point is right. She is not...
She's not, because I feel like if we had Jamie Lee Curtis in this, it would kind of give that idea of, well, Jamie Lee Curtis was the virgin in the Halloween movies, and she survived, and that could be like, well, what do we do with these survivors? Do we just let them live, or do we keep them around? And I could see, like, this is what happens to them.
No, and I think you're right. It is that Sigourney Weaver is... You're right. It is like more of the sci-fi horror films. And she is much more the badass. But I think in the zeitgeist of the movie audience, she is kind of this Mount Rushmore of, when you think of 80s horrors, Sigourney Weaver is on there with, the rest of them.
And I don't want to disparage, because when I saw it in the theater, I went, yes, of course. It was just only afterwards when I went, there might have been a better choice. The director presents the audience and the characters with this devil's arithmetic of, would you sacrifice one life for the world? Even if that life is someone you care about.
Right. And I think what this movie has been saying up the whole time is like, we're not going to play to your expectations of they do not do the sacrifice. And like, well, F it. Let's see what happens with these gods coming back to life. And I know some people, this is where people get lost on this movie, is they do not like the ending.
No, they want that horror film of the monster dies in the end, but can come back for a sequel, but the characters survive or don't. And I kind of like this ending of, it's like, no, this is the horror films of the sacrifices didn't work this time. And I love that the director had been asked in cons and other things of, will there ever be a sequel? And he kept saying, did you watch my movie?
Well, it's like, and I think because it has already been set up to like, we're not playing to the stereotypical, where we're going to have a nice ending, is it does have like just one more WTF moment of, no, they failed. The world has been taken over by these ancient gods that all these horror movies for decades since have been trying to put off. And you know what? This time, well, we screwed up. It's not going to work. And that's where it ends. And I kind of love it for it, because it doesn't give you that nice, tidy ending with a bow on top. It's like, no, this is what happens if these horror films don't work. You get evil gods.
And this came out around the same time as another deconstructed horror film, Tucker Dale versus Evil. But where that one was just saying, hey, what if what we think are the bad guys in the horror films aren't bad guys, it's just accidents? I like that this one is just saying, no, there's a reason why we keep having these horror films in
year after year.
In every culture of, like, there's, if you watch a Japanese horror film, if you watch a Scandinavian horror film, that it feels different because each one is doing what they know best. And I also like, as this has talked about, it's like ritual sacrifices used to be just toss a virgin in a volcano or just strap them down to a stone,
rock
and stab them. It's like, nope, tastes change, and maybe elder gods want more entertaining things too.
Well, and I think it allows itself to evolve with the cultures of the time. And I think that's the fun thing of this movie, is kind of like the Truman Show did years before, where you start to look at things a little differently. It's like you could go into the 80s horrors, the 90s horrors, and then all the horrors of the 2000s and say, like, hey, this story arc still works. There could be a control panel in the background going, okay, now make them do something stupid. Okay, now bring out the slasher. Because at the end of the day, we do enjoy these films for their predictability, but it's like it's our gladiatorial arena.
Yeah.
But I would love to know if people, enjoyed watching this, if it's your first time, if it's your fifth time. I think this is one of those hidden gems that I don't think got a lot of traction in the mainstream audiences, but it is a really wonderful film, especially if, like you said, if you love horror films, you get a lot of Easter eggs. If you don't, you can chuckle and say, like, no, this is exactly why I hate horror films.
Yeah.
I think there is something there for everyone, and it's not too scary where someone who doesn't like, to be scared can get through it.
Yeah, the gory, painful parts are usually cut away, or they are so over the top that you're like, yeah, this doesn't affect me anymore.
Mm-hmm. So I think this is one of those films where it's like, I love it in my collection. I would recommend it for a lot of people who just want something to have something different. But I think it is very key that the surprise is not ruined. I mean, there's a lot of movies out there where like, oh, no, don't spoil it. This is one of those very rare things, like, do not spoil it, because this is so crazy when your mind just starts reeling, like, what is going on here?
Yeah, the enjoyment is piecing it together. And it's not dependent on the twist. It is the twist. The whole movie is a whole bunch of ins and outs. And you just got to give that person the best chance of enjoying it clean.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So from crazy deaths to more down-to-earth, somber dramas, next week we will be doing Dallas Buyers Club.
We appreciate you for stopping by and listening, and we will see you next week.
Yep. Stay safe. Stay sane. Bye.
You're dying.
I thought whiskey was a good idea.
Yeah, no.
All right.